This is the O Review podcast. O Review.
Welcome to another review. I'm going to take a look at something that is new, but kind of old. It's another re-release, but not a re-release in the way that we normally think of, like the Frog Skins or the recent Mumbo/M Frame or anything like that. The Eye Jacket was re-released for a very limited edition recently, but for a full-scale retail production, they came out with the Eye Jacket Redux. And what this is it's sort of a reimagining of the original Eye Jacket. So I have a couple examples of the old version and the new version, as well as a couple frame colors that they've sort of borrowed from previous iterations. So let's take a look at what they're calling Planet X, but it's really kind of the old Cobalt. Planet X is more of a gray and black crackle pattern, whereas Cobalt was more of a blue and black crackle pattern. I kind of went over this in my EV0 review, and the same thing pretty much applies here. So here is the Eye Jacket Redux, and here is the Eye Jacket Generation 2. So there was a couple generations, and I'll kind of just briefly recap those. So there was the first one that came out in '94. It had the imprinted icon that was part of the frame. It had a very matte surface and didn't have any text on the inside of the arms. A few years later, probably, I don't know, maybe somewhere between '94 and '99 before they switched, they added a jacket on one side of the ear stem and made in USA in the other side, and also gave it more of a clear coat, so it was a little bit shinier, it didn't have that matte finish. Now, both of those use the old O-Matter formula, so they were kind of brittle, so I'm not going to be putting these ones on today. But then in '99, they redid everything, and they have the new Eye Jacket that had a lot of the modern things like the true metal icon, the new O-Matter formula. They were also had a clear coat, and they redid the hinges as well, so it didn't have this blocky portion here. It was more of a curved. So with the new one, I don't recall if Cobalt actually ended up making it to those ones. They might have started more with the FMJ applications and some solid colors. But in either case, I have an example of Cobalt in my old M frames as well as this Eye Jacket here. So looking at the two of them, the frame coat is pretty much identical. I'd say maybe the crackle pattern is a little bit smaller on this and it's a little bit larger on this, but each one's going to be unique because it is a hydro print, so depending on where the print lies or adheres to the frame, it's going to be a little bit different for each one. This one is a bit shinier, probably because the clear coat methodology just altered slightly, but they still went with those positive iridium lenses just to complete the color combo. So often you would get the positive red iridium anytime you had a Cobalt frame. And then these are no different. The other one that I got was one called Cortland. And this one did appear on some things like the original top coat. However, it's sort of more of a matte finish. It's very flat finish. So unlike the Planet X/Cobalt, which has a nice shiny clear coat, they didn't opt for this one. It's almost trying to mimic the old FMJ coatings, even though they don't do that anymore. But it's sort of halfway between that and then the sparkle patterns like brown sugar that we had a couple years back. So it does sort of still have the very fine sparkle tint to it, and I imagine if you clear coated this, it might end up being similar to what you have here. It is a little bit darker than the original, but that could be just a factor of the fact that it doesn't have a clear coat. But it's nice, sort of another throwback to the original. So I believe these have the 24 karat gold iridium lenses. Whereas most of the original Cortlands hadn't really gotten to that stage yet where you had those 24K lenses. The last one I have is a matte clear with Prizm Low Light. Now these appeared a few years back, the lens specifically, in the Olympics when it was called Prizm Stadium. A lot of the athletes were being given pairs because they wanted to have some sort of prism help on things that are either indoors or in very low light. So Prizm Stadium was the name given to it. A lot of people really wanted to see it, and for a while we didn't really have anything, but then they came out with Prizm Low Light. And a lot of times, or initially, Prizm Low Light only came on a white frame, and those aren't really my favorite, so when I saw the Eye Jacket Redux with a matte clear frame in Prizm Low Light, I definitely had to have these. So really like these ones here. So Prizm Low Light is kind of like an upgrade to clear. So a lot of the Prizm lenses are taking over the original classic lenses that we're used to. And this one's going to be sort of like an enhancement to clear. So it really doesn't block much light, but it does sort of enhance a few hues to make it a little bit easier on your eyes, especially indoors. So what is different about the M-Frame Redux versus the original? One is the newer formula. Although if you were comparing it to the new Eye Jacket, you're probably going to be something on par. It's a little bit flatter. There's a lot more fluid contours on the original Eye Jacket that kind of make it one solid piece. And that's not surprising because the Eye Jacket was the first one that was 3D CAD designed to really have those fluid contours. Prior to that, we had some wires and we had things like zeros and M-frames, which had very harsh angles. Now this one doesn't have harsh angles just because it's a lack of technology, but more because the design language is kind of pushing that way. There's almost some gas can inspired angles here between where the temple kind of meets the stem, with that high ridge kind of going above the temple portion here. And but it also does have those traditional oval lenses that we're used to with the Eye Jacket, so they didn't really mess with that too much. The nose bridge is also very flat, where it kind of bumps out on the original Eye Jacket. And then the other thing that we kind of have recently is we have these little tags here. And those tags are, they're basically used in the factory to kind of track shipments and whatnot. They do have a little RFID tag in it, mainly for internal use, so they can kind of just figure out what inventory is moving around the factory. After it leaves the factory, it's kind of defunct, but it's kind of interesting that that is there. They also swap out different ones based on where it's either assembled or built. So these ones say USA assembled. There's a lot of them that say USA made. So instead of imprinting it directly on the frame, like they did with the originals, depending on where it's made, they can just sort of swap a different chip on it. And at least you still have that Made in USA tag on some of them. It's just not ingrained into the frame, unfortunately. As far as comfort goes, I'm kind of iffy on it. They do kind of ride a little bit low, so they feel like they're kind of pointing down a bit. They don't hug your face as much as some of the other models do. And then, this is more of a personal preference, I'm used to a lot of things like the half jackets, the sliver edge, which don't have the bottom frame. So I like a lot of things that kind of just rest right against your face. There's no blocking the peripheral vision on your bottom. And going back to a full frame lens, it's just something I'm not used to, at least on a daily basis. They are comfortable though, they're very light. And because they have the ear socks and the nose pads, they're going to be very secure, especially if you're doing any sort of sporting event. I believe these would probably be, I don't know, at this point they might be considered an active wear versus a sport. However, the original Eye Jackets were more in the sporty leg, so I would say they're probably definitely maybe more towards the sport. Definitely in the jacket family, even though we don't use that designation anymore. Aside from that, you know, they got the traditional dual cam hinges, and I believe they are also breakaway stems, which is a huge point, especially for something that's going to be more in the sport active wear. I'm not sure why even any of the sport ones have pins still in it, but I'm glad that these don't. So in case these things do happen to pop off, pop them right back on, no problem. So that's sort of my quick review of the Eye Jacket Redux. I do recommend it. They're out now, and feel free to check out a store and see what else they have. Plenty of different colorways. There's also a couple of very special limited editions which have been released lately. Obviously they're not around anymore, especially if this video gets a little bit older. But there's plenty of other standard colorways that you can definitely check out now. So do check them out. Let me know if you've have a chance to try them, and let me know what you think. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thank you.